Hey guys, I don't know what happened. This is an opening to the video that I don't understand what happened. I just recorded a 45-minute long Q&A with this incredible set where I have Civil War cartridges and apocalypse gnome, and came to you in my bathrobe in a very COVID-19 social isolation type situation. And when I went to dump the video to edit it to post it to the channel, it was all audio with just a black screen. This kind of stuff happens, and I don't know why. And this is inexplicable. It's never happened before. But I'll be honest, I'm not going to re-record the whole video. So I'm giving you this intro with some video so you could see what the scene looked like, and then I'm just going to go to a screenshot of just me sitting here going like this, and you're going to get the audio. I apologize. I don't know, but redoing all of that and answering 45 minutes of questions again is just not really viable at the moment. So hopefully you get to see the scene here of this is the real world I'm in right now, making sharps cartridges, musket cartridges, getting stuff ready for a series about Civil War weapons here on the InRange. You've already seen some, but there's more coming. So I'm just going to screenshot myself here in some goofy pose, and that's going to be just a picture for the rest of this video. And I apologize, but I thank you for your patience, and hopefully you enjoyed the audio portion of this unmolested. Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to an episode of InRange. This is the April 2020 Q&A brought to you by Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters that make this channel possible. We're not funded by any sort of sponsorship or advertising money. It is strictly a viewer-supported endeavor. And I figured I'd bring you the Q&A this month from a very real situation, making Civil War era ammunition, paper cartridges that is, next to my Apocalypse Gnome, and reading questions brought to you by Patreon supporters. There are always a lot of them, and we can never get all of them, so I'll just get going. Logan, thoughts on the 2011 platform for EDC, Everyday Carry? My initial thought on that is I don't know why you'd want to do that. That's a big, heavy gun that doesn't bring you anything more than you could do with, say, a Glock 19, or even now in the world of SIG P365s or Springfield Armory Hellcats. I don't know why you'd want to bother with something like the 2011. Might be a great gun, might be a great competition gun, but as for an everyday carry, unless you really are a glutton for heavyweight punishment, I don't see it. So my thought would be why? Nicholas, what is your favorite tea or coffee blend? This one's easy, actually, and it's going to be pretty straightforward and probably not surprise the audience. My favorite coffee blend is the Café du Monde Chicory that you can get pretty much everywhere nowadays. It is a blend of chicory and coffee that is typically served at Café du Monde in New Orleans. And chicory is an interesting history of its own right, which I do plan to do a video about coffee history on the channel someday. And I think that the Café du Monde blend is really the best one. There's a lot of Gucci ones out there, artisanal ones, but that little orange can from Café du Monde's my winner on that. When it comes to tea, I'm kind of an Earl Grey guy. I like stronger teas, so don't really care about the brand so much, but that's my bag. Chinley, if more countries had adopted the M16 platform as their standard service rifle at the same time as the US, would its reputation today be better or worse? Oh, that's an interesting question because I think so much of it depends on how they source their ammunition. So much of the lore about the M16 platform being a problem is based around the change of the powder type in the ammunition when the gun was first issued to troops. If you didn't watch the video that was re-released as an InRange Classic recently with Jim Sullivan, the designer of the gun, or at least one of the primary designers of the gun, and that the ammunition powder change is what really caused the initial big problems with the gun during its initial adaptation during Vietnam. Let's say that it was adapted and adopted across multiple different countries, and they had not acquired their ammunition from the if they had followed the ammunition recommendations, I would say that the reputation would be better, not worse. If they had acquired their ammunition at the same time as we had and same way that we had for the Vietnam War, then the reputation would be worse because it just would have been a force multiplier in terms of people having issues with their guns based on the wrong ammunition attempting to be used in the gun at the time. So my thought would be that they probably would not be acquiring American ammunition and follow the actual recommendations, and that the reputation probably would have been better. Philip W. I'm looking to get an AK-style PMAG adapter. Any suggestions? The goal would be to diversify my firearms collection, but keeping common caliber and magazine. I don't have a suggestion for you in regards to that. I have never been happy with any of the AR-15 Stanag-style magazine conversions on AKs. I'm sure some of them work fine. I have never found them to be great, and I don't like them. I would say standardize on the caliber, Go with 5.56 if you really need to. There are a lot of good Bulgarian 5.56 guns from Arsenal. I have a short-barreled AK in 5.56 that uses Bulgarian Circle 10 5.56 mags, and while it doesn't standardize on the same magazine, that gun has been literally 100% reliable. So I would say go with a 5.56 AK if you're really going to stick with the cartridge, but I would say don't bother with any of the quote-unquote PMAG conversions. Andrew Duke. Will you be doing a test with the spinner to try and find something that will spin it with one shot? For instance, a musket. I am going to try and do this. I think that's a really interesting game, and I think trying to use an 1861 musket or a 1853 Enfield from the Civil War, especially with all the Civil War work I'm doing, will be a lot of fun. Huge bullets at relatively good velocities. We're talking about a 550 grain bullet at around over 1,000 feet per second. Now, if it doesn't spin it at one, I think it'll also be fun to try and spin it with two, with a musket going through standard Civil War loading procedures, which is what you see here. These cartridges are paper cartridges for musket loading, and that's my goal with that. So that should be a fun thing. I'm going to do video content about the 1861 musket as well as the 1853 Enfield, and I think the spinner is definitely going to show up in that. In terms of spinning the spinner with one shot, we've seen it almost already happen with other rounds, so I think it's viable, and I think some of these Civil War guns might actually be the thing to bring the heat, because they are shooting really a lot of mass. Richard. Where do you get your ideas or information for the history vignettes? Quite honestly, I'm just a constant consumer of historical information. I never get bored reading about history. Now, there are topics that I care about history more than others. The Old West is definitely one of them. As I've said before on the channel, the Eastern Front of World War II is another. And so I'm just constantly consuming content. And when you combine books, especially I have a fairly significant library of books on the topic, and start doing cross-referencing, it's really interesting that your knowledge starts to compound upon the knowledge you've already developed. So let's say you learn about topic A, and you delve into topic A, and then you go visit the site of topic A. Oatman Massacre was one of these. You go out there and you learn something about it, and then you learn more about it, and then you start to find out associated names around it, and then it turns out you learn other stuff on top and top and top of that. It's amazing how it all layers on top of one another. In the research for the Oatman Massacre, I learned about a whole bunch of things that actually ties into other videos that have already been done on InRange that I didn't know about. John St. Silas, Silas St. John, excuse me, who was the man that survived the second Dragoon Springs Massacre, or actually the first Dragoon Springs Massacre, of which we have a video on this channel, actually also ran a stage stop in what were called the Pima villages just briefly after the Oatmans passed through there in 1851. So he did that about 10 years later. But it's amazing to see these all tie together. And so there are more videos coming. So to be honest, I get the ideas from just constantly consuming historical-based content and then finding more and more things lining up and then being, what's this? What's that? And then just start kind of going down rabbit holes. And the amount of stuff you can find if you know how to do the research is pretty astounding. Charles. Should the sites featured in your Old West Vignette series be more deserving of state support for their preservation, in your opinion, or are they generally as well preserved as their fame or notoriety deserves? Wow, that really depends on the site. So, for example, the Oatman Massacre site has a sign and a little monument, and then a simulated or grave thereof, which has been there since essentially 1851, but the sign was put in later. That is so remote and such a kind of demure thing, it's really just a pile of rocks, that it doesn't really deserve preservation. And the wheel ruts cut into the stone going up that butte are really don't need preservation. Again, remote and quite a difficult thing to even try to preserve. But other things like ghost towns I've been to, Charleston's one on the San Pedro River, that's just out there to rot. And are they more deserving of preservation? I think they are. But are the finances there, and do people care enough to preserve them? The answer is no. A lot of these sites are quite remote. A lot of them are just adobe walls rotting in the desert, and as a result, no one really gives a crap about them. Will we be sorry that we didn't preserve these sites more later as generations come and go? I think we will. I think there'll be people that come after us that wish they could have seen these things that will no longer be able to, because some of these sites that I go to are right at the tail edge of being visible even now, so they're almost gone. Would I like to see more preservation? Yes. Are we going to see it? No. Do they deserve it? Yes. In my opinion, they do. Red Rich. Do you believe that there are any major benefits to the Winchester 1892 pattern as opposed to the 1873 for modern day applications? This all is based around what cartridge you want to use. We're talking about lever guns here. I still espouse that the 1873 toggle link in either 45 Colt or the original 4440 are the fastest high capacity lever guns, and they're the ones you want. Treat them as a PCC because, well, they are a pistol caliber, but they are high capacity in terms of 15 rounds or so, very low recoil and very fast to shoot. And the cartridges that are being chambered in them, including if you get one in 357 Magnum nowadays, are more than sufficiently powerful enough than most of the applications of which you would use the rifle in the first place. The 1892 has a better locking system and therefore can handle more powerful cartridges, but I don't see that as an advantage for what the lever gun's intended to do. If I want a more powerful cartridge, I probably am going to walk away from lever guns and look at some other sort of system. The lever gun to me is the manually operated combat gun, and then in terms of its capacity and speed and lack of recoil and ability to put fire down range. So for me, the 73 is still and continues to be and probably will always be the winner. Nachenko, would you rather take an M1 Garand or an SKS into combat? This is easy for me. The M1 Garand, without a doubt. Obviously, the M1 with 30-06 has a little bit more recoil. And has 2 rounds less capacity, the SKS having 10 to the M1's 8. However, in my experience, reloading an SKS under duress on the clock with SKS stripper clips is a nightmare proposal. It is slow and generally fraught with failure. Reloading an N block clip of 8 rounds into the M1 is quick, fast, and easy. And if you know what you're doing, very, very expedient. So I believe I could easily keep up a much higher rate of fire with an M1 than I could an SKS. And the sights are significantly better, as well as is the accuracy, in my opinion. And I would absolutely be able to continue a higher rate of fire downrange than I ever could with an SKS post having those extra 2 rounds. So for me, easy choice, M1 Garand. Deviant Olaf. Hey, Deviant, how you doing? Personal gut guess. Do you think Defcon will happen this summer? I'm assuming you're referencing the current COVID-19 pandemic. This is being filmed in April. I don't think so. I know we're seeing signs of this getting better, and we're seeing the flattening of the curve as we would hope to see with people behaving appropriately with social distancing. But if you look back historically speaking, and I don't want to predict terrible things, but if you look back at what was then called the Spanish flu, but the influenza of 1918, 1919, there were 2 waves. There was the original initial infection rate, which then killed a number of people. There was an attempt to squelch it with social distancing. And then if you go to the cemetery at Sasko, which is actually close to where I live, that is a cemetery predominantly filled with people who died from that influenza. Their graves are 1921, 22, and 23, which was the second wave of an infection. Unless we're careful with reopening things, we're going to see the initial infection just become a secondary infection, and the second wave can be even worse. So, of the most logical answers I've heard about how to address this issue, it should not be based on how many people are infected or even mortality rate. It should be based on the local facility's ability to deal with the medical response. So, like, for example, New York's medical facilities are overwhelmed. It should be continued to be locked down. But a place that is not currently overwhelmed and the medical facilities are capable of handling the current infection rate as it goes up or down, as long as it doesn't go above the current ability of the medical facilities in the area to address the problem, then maybe those areas should be considered open. So that said, the risk of a second wave is real. And if we're not careful with how we open up again after all the social distancing, it could just reoccur. So we don't want to waste our effort. We don't want to waste sitting here in our robes, alone in our homes, not eating sushi and making ammunition by just having it happen again. So my gut guess is I don't think Defcon's going to happen. I would like it to because I've scheduled around it and I was going to make it this year. So let's keep our fingers crossed and let's hope, of course, that everything gets better enough that things like Defcon can continue to happen unabated. Iraha. Dual wielding pistols. Was it a thing in the Old West, or was there any situation that it would be practical? Dual wielding, I'm assuming you're meaning firing one in each hand. I'm not going to say it never happened. I cannot think of one gunfight on the top of my head that is historically accurately reported in which that was a thing. It probably did, and I'm sure there'll be references in the comments about where it did happen, but it is not like it's represented in the movies. So in cowboy action shooting, they have a division called Gunfighter, and it's pistol in each hand, and every movie on Earth seems to have a gunfighter with a pistol in each hand. But in terms of that being a practical application in a gunfight, highly unlikely and required a lot of skill from someone to be able to do that reliably. Now, there were a lot of people that would carry, there were people that carried two pistols, but they would typically switch them off because reloads, of course, were slow with a single action army. So you'd fire your first pistol, holster it, and then acquire your second pistol. That said, culturally speaking, people that carried two pistols, typically speaking, not 100%, were called two-gun men. Not like two-gun action, but two pistol or two-gun people, two-gun men. And those were almost always considered nefarious ne'er-do-wells. So if you rode into town with a pistol, a brace of pistols, one on each hip, for the most part, the local community would see you as probably a problem. Kira Sawaf 7. Sorry, I mispronounced that, I'm sure. Have you ever considered writing a book? Yeah, I have, and I don't know that I will, and I don't know that I won't. I've considered two possible books that would be interesting for me to write. One is one I've talked about historical topics that are frequently left out of the discussion. A lot of things that you see in the videos now today, like, for example, the Battle of New Orleans and the subsequent freed slave community of Fazanville, which was destroyed by the National Park Service. Stuff that's left out of the narrative. Civil rights use of firearms, almost always left out of the narrative. The Dragon Springs Massacre. Things that I'm covering already or plan to cover would be really interesting in aggregate as a book. I may do that someday because what I could do is take my video work and transfer each one of those videos into a chapter, essentially. And the research already sort of has been done. So that may happen. The other one that might be compelling is something to do with lever guns and Old West application thereof and the development. But I don't know that that's as interesting to me. I think I'd be more interested in the historical vignettes type book. So maybe. Aaron, what is the best brand of 8mm Mauser ammo I have found? Well, if you're going to buy 8mm Mauser on the commercial market today that's manufactured today, really you don't have a lot of choices. The most commercially viable in terms of cost is Preva Partisan PPU. I am still working off a large stash of surplus Yugoslavian, which is absolutely fantastic. The really old 1950s Yugoslavian stuff's not, but the stuff made in the 80s is amazing quality, match-grade ammunition. So if you can get your hands on the Yugoslavian 8mm surplus ammunition, whether it's the standard or the quote-unquote sniper, you are not going to do yourself a disservice. If you're going to buy commercially manufactured, I would say just go with PPU. Ghostly garbage. If the U.S. ever goes back to standardizing on the 7.62 NATO cartridge, and then I cut the question off, we're not. So this question about ever going back to 7.62 NATO, I don't know why this comes up reliably and regularly, besides there was a rumor a year ago or two about that happening. It isn't happening. The military is not going back to 7.62 NATO. There might be a change in caliber someday in some cartridge, but it ain't going to be 7.62 NATO. M193 Goofball. Why was the lever action more popular than the pump action for high capacity rapid fire intermediate caliber carbines? This is easy in my opinion. First of all, the Winchester had a real stranglehold on the market with the Winchester, whether it was the Henry, the 66, the 73 or more. Colt tried to compete with what was called the Lightning, which was a pump action. And I have fired both originals and reproduction Lightnings. And let me tell you, they are fraught with problems. They are unreliable, frankly, pieces of shit. Every one of them, even the original Colts, are problematic. And when they jam, they are done. That is a full disassembly to get them working again. As well as, I find the actual pump action more jarring to your sight picture than running the lever. You can keep the lever on the stock on your shoulder and run a lever on a lever gun and keep your sight picture downrange. The pump action seems to be more disruptive. So besides it being more disruptive, they're unreliable guns. I do plan to do a Lightning on the channel at some point because it needs to be covered. But I really strongly believe that the reason is, one, people knew and trusted the lever action that came from Winchester and Marlin and others. And the pump actions were just generally problematic. Chris, do you guys own and use suppressors? I can't recall a video of you guys ever using one. I do. I have two. I have a Gemtech Halo and I have another one for 9mm for my sub gun. They're rarely ever used on the video because they don't really come up on audio properly. Even when you put a suppressor on, the way mic compression works, for the most part, it still sounds like a gunshot because you're getting the supersonic crack for the most part, unless it's a subsonic round in a 9mm. And honestly, suppressors are generally more of a liability than a benefit. Even with the 9mm, except for using extremely slow velocity subsonics, they're still not hearing safe. You still need hearing protection, unless you want to do damage to your ears. The mic doesn't pick it up properly. And then you have this big heavy thing hanging off the gun that's now hot, that's easy to burn yourself on and difficult to store. So in matches, they're a liability. On video, they're a liability. And except for limited application, tactical or hunting or other reasons, suppressors are generally not that great a thing. They're great for being quiet. They're great for the community around you. They should not be regulated. That goes without saying. It should be easy to get them, and if they weren't, I would certainly have far more than 2. But in terms of using them on video or a match, they're really not a benefit. Jordan, would the PKM still be as good as if it was chambered in a different caliber? Well, that's been done. PKMs have been chambered in different calibers, and the PKM is a fantastic belt-fed machine gun, one of the best in the world. In fact, probably the best in the world up until recently, where we're seeing things like the Knight's light assault machine gun and things like that, which I think now surpass, quite honestly, or an Ultimax, of course. But would it still be just as good? Yeah. I don't think 54R brings any sort of special magic to the PKM. I think the PKM is just a great design, and if it was in 54R or in 308 or 8mm Mauser for that matter, I don't think it would make a big difference. It's a phenomenal gun. Mike, is it better to build pistol skills with a full-size gun or a small carry pistol as a novice? Well, it's easier to build them with a full pistol, but if you're going to be carrying a smaller gun, a carry gun, I would recommend that your practice is with the gun you're going to carry. There's not a lot of reason. You can build skills, and those skills cross between different pistols, of course. But if you're practicing with a Glock 17 and then carrying a Hellcat, what happens if you need to use the Hellcat? So I would recommend practicing with the gun you're going to carry. It might be a little harder at first, but if you put your due diligence in, you're putting iterations in on the gun that you're ultimately going to have on you, and that matters more. Kenneth, any update on the next Desert Brutality? No. The current Desert, we don't even have that on the radar. That would be 2021. Currently, the things that we're talking about right now is Woodland Brutality, which will be out in West Virginia, as well as something called World War III Brutality. Both have been discussed and announced in Patreon and on the Discord server if you're a supporter. They're currently in a limbo status due to the current COVID-19 pandemic. And once the pandemic is clarified, we will then be able to figure out times and dates for both of those. Desert Brutality will come after that. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, we do have a Patreon perk called Two Gun Army. Those people get early enrollment to matches as well as generally get discounts. And that allows you to get in the match earlier. Then regular Patreon supporters get it before it goes to the public, and then ultimately public. So Woodland Brutality is still something we're hoping to bring to the table at the end of the year, as well as World War III Brutality, which is going to be freaking cool as heck out in Parma, Idaho. That one's got some real magic around it. So, but we're not going to really do anything right now with dates and scheduling until COVID-19 is over with. Stephen, as a scientist, I greatly appreciated your response to the SARS-CoV-2. From what I've seen, it's been very alarming to see the gun community gravitate towards conspiracy theories, outright rejection of epidemiological and public health, and descriptions of relatively mild public health interventions as tyranny. Has this looked as alarming from your perspective? Where do you see this all heading? Well, first of all, it's hard. We don't want to paint everyone with a big, broad brush, right? So my response to it was what I believed was the most logical, scientific, rational approach, which was I did not want to run matches or things or situations in which I would be putting anyone at attending my event at risk, nor did I want to encourage anyone to come to an event where they might put others at risk. We're all sitting around bored right now, and the idea of going out to shoot a match sounds really compelling, right? Because we miss it. I miss Two Gun. I miss all those things that are super fun right now. And but at the same time, when you are running events like this, I believe it is on you as a small form of leadership to encourage other people to do the best thing as well. And not running the event is at this moment the best encouragement to ensure that we flatten the curve and deal with this properly, which statistically looking, looks like appears to be happening. So what we're going to see after this is we're going to see a bunch of people have survivorship bias, where they're going to say that the flattening of the curve was not necessary, that none of this behavior was required, and they're going to use that as justification to justify their argument that none of it was required in the first place, which is not scientifically rational thinking. I think regardless if it's the gun community or society as a whole, we have a lot of people that for whatever reason, discount that type of logical thinking and rational approach to issues and automatically revert to the concern that it's tyranny or something else. Now, there is such a thing, and I'm not saying to say that we should not be concerned and aware and absolutely diligent to that. But at the same time, when we know from a scientific perspective that you can be a asymptomatic carrier, and that there are vulnerable people in our society, whether they are the elderly or those that are immunocompromised or for other reasons, and that doing something as simple as just not going to matches for a little while means that you are doing, even if it had a lesser effect than we'd like. If not going to matches for a little while means that you're not putting others in this society at risk for a couple months for something that's nothing more than an optional event that's really just for fun, means that you might have saved a few lives. Why would you not do that? I mean, if your life revolves so much around going to matches that not going to them means that your entire world collapses around it, I would consider recommending some introspection. John, what is your unicorn gun of the Old West? Well, I'm not going to say a specific gun because that would be some historically tied thing. And it's not even, a lot of people make them think they're the best, but they're not necessarily the best. But in terms of machining they are, it would be a Mulrun and Hulbert. I would like to get myself a perfect condition Mulrun and Hulbert, one that's working in perfect condition and reliable. They are fascinating guns from their mechanical and machining perspective, and someday maybe I'll be able to splurge and get one of them. But a proper quote-unquote skull crusher in 4440 would be my unicorn Old West gun. Kevin, what is a good first optic to try for a history nerd who's only ever used iron sights? I don't know how to deal with this question because you use the word history nerd as though you're wanting me to explain to you to get something historically relevant. And I don't know what you mean by optic. What are you trying to do? Are you talking about a magnified optic? You're talking about precision shooting, long range shooting, combat shooting? I'm going to do the same thing I do all the time when I get a question about what should I get if I'm not going to use iron sights, and I'm going to tell you red dot. Red dot has no eye relief requirements. It provides the quickest, fastest acquisition and is absolutely viable up to 300 yards if you get a good one. So I'm going to tell you a red dot sight because a red dot sight provides all the advantages and very few disadvantages and really is a force multiplier in terms of sight acquisition and speed. Bennett, what are your thoughts on the trapezoidal sights on the modern Steyr pistols? Have you ever shot one of their pistols with these sights? Is there a there, or is it just marketing? I have used them. And I think that those sights, which is like a pyramid in the front, one might have said an old school barleycorn, but then, of course, the rear is the inverse of it for the same trapezoidal type configuration. I find them very quick to acquire, but I also find them very precise because the little tip of the point on the front post makes it a very precision sighting system. I think the Steyr sighting system is excellent. I also think it's different, and therefore in the American market will be considered a no-go. Just like we see magazine releases with the trigger finger on things like the Walther P99 or some of the HK guns, and those are generally disregarded because they're not the standard button release. The sighting system on the Steyr pistols are considered weird and therefore abhorrent to the American market that doesn't want anything different. That said, I think those Steyr pistol sights are good. In fact, I think they're superior to a lot of 3-dot and standard post type sights, and I would like to see more of them. Sam, one favorite of each: book, band, and podcast. Book, Fahrenheit 451. Absolutely influential in the way I think about the world. Band, this is hard because I have a vast variety of music that I enjoy, but I'm going to go ahead and go with Skinny Puppy. Podcast, this is another hard one, but I'm going to give you 2, 3 because I can't break them up. Ono, Ross, and Carey. which is a great one about this friend couple that they investigate all sorts of weird religions or pseudoscience and actually become a part of them and then report back what the experience was like. Sawbones, which is a husband and wife that do the history of medical science, and they're fascinating. And Last Podcast on the Left, which is everything horrible. Great research about all sorts of horrible things in the world, serial killers, cults, supernatural, etc., from a very good perspective and good research. So those are my three. Dan, if you had to pick a bolt action for a match, which one you would pick? P17, the Eddystone. With the P17 Enfield Eddystone, absolutely without a doubt, it is still the best bolt action military rifle that feeds from stripper clips, in my opinion, still to this day. Fast to reload, excellent sights, incredibly reliable. Without a doubt, the P17. Moth Squad. 5.7 by 28 from a pistol barrel on a spinner target. Spinnable or not? If you are really good and can triple tap, it is possible. It is also extremely unlikely. So is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. Out of a longer barrel length PS90, it is definitely viable, and I've seen it done because of the velocity increase. Out of the pistol, that's a rough day. Andy, in the next global conflict, what do you think would be America's greatest shortfall when it comes to producing war material? Electronics and pharmaceutical goods. We have come to find out with the current pandemic that when we were unable to import things from our number one manufacturing location in the world, which is China, electronics are essentially built and made in China, as are a significant amount of pharmaceuticals. So I know you wouldn't think of as electronics and pharmaceuticals as war material, but they definitely are. And we would find ourselves having problems with that for sure. Oh, lead. Lead mining is essentially no-go in this country anymore. And I don't know what to say about that, but the reality is we really don't have our own lead reserves. And while we are certainly trying to move to a lead-free projectile world, the reality is that's not where we're at. And a lack of lead to be able to make projectiles would be a significant problem. Dean Ranged. I have pre-ordered a WWSD 2020 and a Mark III lower. Is the delivery date going to be affected by the death bug? I'm getting this question, I think, 3 to 4 times a day. Here's the deal. We are not currently off track. When this was announced, it was always announced as Q2 of 2020. At the moment, I am not aware of anything that will make it not Q2. If something changes, and it's certainly possible, we will absolutely put out a video stating as such. We're not going to leave people in limbo. So unless you hear from us, we're currently on track. Does that mean that I'm promising that it is on track or will be on track? I can't promise that. We don't know. COVID is a thing that's going on in the world amongst other things, and it's having grand ramifications. But right at this moment, Q2 2020 is still on track. Will, what do you think the best design for a bayonet is? The one you leave at home. I'm going to do a video about bayonets in general, going back all the way to the Civil War. And we have said on this channel that bayonets are obsolete, and they've been obsolete for longer than I thought. People always get really crazy in the comments about this when we talk about it, and when we left the bayonet lug off of the What Would Stoner Do project. But the reality is, putting a knife on the end of your gun has had very little war effect or combat effect since the Civil War. Yes, there are exceptions. There's the one thing that happened there and the one thing that happened there. There's also the one thing happened there and the one thing that happened there that was done with a brick and a rock. That doesn't mean I would advise you to carry one. So a bayonet is just a thing that you now carry, and that space can be used for something better than a bayonet. So I would recommend leaving the bayonets at home, and that there isn't a good design for a bayonet. James, how much do you trust cloud computing when it comes to sensitive personal information, creative intellectual property, etc.? 0. I trust it 0.0%. Unless you're encrypting it with keys that only you control, you should consider cloud computing extremely hostile. Don't do it unless you're encrypting it, and unless you're encrypting it right. And now, reality is that happening? Nope. And even if you do it right, your intellectual property and intellectual information and your private information has already been put onto cloud resources by corporations inappropriately. So you can't solve all of this. But what you can solve is you doing it yourself. If you're going to use cloud storage resources, make sure that you're using proper encryption to do it, or don't do it. Gannon, what two-gun setup would you run in 1899 Arizona? 1873 Winchester lever-action rifle and a Schofield. Kevin, what historical site would you like to do a vignette on but cannot due to external factors? There's a lot of these. The two that really come to mind would be to go to Volgograd, which was, of course, Stalingrad. I want to do something there for sure. That is a huge, expensive endeavor, and that's been cost prohibitive and maybe politically problematic, but I'd love to do videos from Stalingrad, especially about some of the battle sites there. That's a checkbox dream. And now it's been sort of kind of ruined by the HBO documentary about Chernobyl, but I would like to do something in Pripyat. I don't think that was covered or has been covered in the way that I would want to cover it. Stephen W. Oh, let me add you one more, Kevin. I would like to do something, and I don't know that it's possible due to the cultural sensitivities, but I would like to do something at Wounded Knee here in the U.S. Also, another topic that has not been handled properly and not addressed in a way that I would like to address it. Steven, what's your favorite gun to just go out and shoot for fun? You know what? It's still my RP46. RP46 is a belt-fed conversion to the DP27/28. Rick Smith of SMG Guns makes both the DP28 and the RP46 conversion. And when it's just for fun, I got to tell you, going out there with a belt of 54R is a hoot. It is absolutely my favorite gun to shoot for fun. Alec, did the M14 offer anything over the Italian BM59? No. The BM59 has a better magazine insertion capability. It retained the original op rod, so the gas system wasn't as messed with. No. The M14 does not do anything better than the BM59. Matthew, if you were being sent back in time to say 1775, would you bring a modern firearm or a black powder firearm that you can make new cartridges for? I would not bring a modern firearm. As much as that would be a force multiplier, the amount of ammunition that you could carry for the duration of how you needed it would inevitably run out. Now, well, hold on. Let me answer this better. I would bring a modern firearm because then I could just transition to a black powder firearm when that thing ran dry. So yeah, I would bring a modern firearm with as much ammunition as I could, and then when I was out of it, then I would switch over to a black powder firearm. Now that said, the reason I was saying black powder firearm initially was because you could make cartridges, and the modern firearm will become nothing more than a club as soon as you run out of whatever the modern ammunition you brought with you was. You're not going to be making 5.56 in 1775. The machining capabilities are not there. The powder is not there. It's not possible. So unless you can bring ammunition with you, it would be absolutely a waste of time to bring a modern firearm. Paul, in your opinion, what is the best lever action chambered in .357 Magnum currently on the market? I haven't shot them all. I haven't used them all, so I can't answer this thoroughly. But what I can tell you is what I said earlier in the video. I'm a huge proponent of the 1873 toggle link for speed and handling, and so I would go with a Uberte reproduction, 1873, and .357 Magnum. I know there are others. I know Henry does some stuff. Don't know a lot about them. I'd have to look into it further. But I would personally, if I was going to go for .357 Magnum, I would go with a 24-inch barrel for full velocity, full capacity, and I would get an 1873 Uberte. Dayton, in doing research for Old West Vignettes, what has been the most eye-opening information that changed the way you thought about the subject matter? It wasn't during research. You know what? It would have been more around the Underground Railroad, not the Old West Vignettes. Now, maybe those are Old West Vignettes. When I found out about the community of Fazanville that was destroyed by the National Park Service, and that the community subsequently moved to the lower Ninth Ward with not very good documentation, which was then again destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. But they still persevere and still have their church there as their epicenter, the Battleground Baptist Church. That's a straight line all the way back to the Civil War. That's fascinating and a story that's just left out of the narrative. And I think that also turned me on to doing research about firearms and civil rights movement along with firearms, which there will be videos on the channel someday about that, and how much of that narrative is completely left out of our standard American history, and how much of it's left out of the conversation intentionally. And when If you've not watched the Battle of New Orleans video here on the channel, I would urge you to do so. And some of that, or the Underground Railroad series, I would recommend that as well. And the when I do come out with some of the civil rights content, the fact that this has been ignored or intentionally left out of the narrative or out of our cultural memory is, I'm going to use the word disgusting, because it changes the conversation. Justin, you've talked about mezcal in the past. Are there any particular brands of mezcal that you would recommend over others? As with all things booze, no matter what I recommend, someone's going to say, but that one's not good. There's this one. But I'm going to put one out there that I like in particular. Is it the highest end? Absolutely not, but it's something I really enjoy. Del Maguey makes a what they call a crema, which is a blend of mezcal and agave syrup. It is absolutely delicious. So the Del Maguey Del Maguey mezcal crema, which has the agave syrup in it, is a fabulous mezcal. It's delicious if you like sweet. If you don't like sweet, you may not dig that. But man, it is awesome stuff. Sebastian, if you had an MDR in 308, is the 5.56 MDR conversion kit worth the minimum of $550 price tag, or is it one better to spend a little more money for a nice to decent AR-15 and have two independent rifles that are both ready to use instead of fiddling with zero in a conversion kit? Here's what I'll say to that. The MDR in 308 is not my favorite gun. I don't really care for it, in fact. The MDR in 5.56 is absolutely fantastic. I've had zero reliability issues with it. Recoil's excellent. Everything about the 5.56 MDR is wonderful. It balances well. Is it better than an AR-15? I don't know. You got to answer if you want a bullpup or not. But I would not feel bad or feel concerned about having the MDR in 5.56. So I would say that if you were to spend the $550 to convert your MDR from 308 to 5.56, you probably are just going to end up selling the 308 parts off and staying with the gun in 5.56. It is an entirely different experience, far more comfortable to use, and a far better rifle. So my recommendation is to you, get the $550 conversion kit, convert your MDR to 5.56, and don't look back. Michael, what happened to the video you guys did on Waco and the Branch Davidians? I never did one about Waco and the Branch Davidians. It was something I considered. I have visited the Waco site. I have been there. I have met Branch Davidians because I went there to visit. I did some video and film there for my own interests, but I have never done one for InRange, so I don't know what you're talking about. There has never been a video on InRange about Waco or the Branch Davidians. Last question, and this one will become very controversial very quick. Ben, as it pertains to cleaning firearms, is it your personal practice to clean intermittently or after every usage? Modern guns, I don't clean them essentially at all, to be honest. I just lube them and keep going. AKs, ARs, MDR, I don't clean them. I just, if they need some lube, I lube them, wipe them down with some lube, and keep on going. I don't bother. Modern ammunition is not corrosive. As long as you're doing the right thing and lubing it properly, you don't really need to. Now, am I saying you shouldn't? No, of course not. Am I saying you should never clean your AR? No, I'm not. But I'm also saying here at InRange, I shoot such a wide variety of guns so much that trying to clean them consistently each time is a waste of time for me. And the reality is I've never had a malfunction induced as a result of it. If I'm shooting black powder, oh yeah. I come back and clean them immediately, within hours if possible, but the next day at the latest. That is corrosive and will absolutely rust the heck out of the gun very quickly. And when you're shooting an antique, a literal, actual firearm from the Civil War that's been kept in great condition with a great bore, I do not be one person that ruins the bore on that gun. So I clean those immediately. Modern guns, I just lube them and keep on going, and I don't bother with cleaning them really, honestly, generally at all. Well, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this Q&A. Comes in, it looks like 45 minutes or so. It's always a little different doing it as an individual solo versus having some sort of co-host, but here we are during the pandemic, and so social isolation applies. As I said earlier in the video, it is Patreon supporters that actually are able to submit these questions, and I am very thankful to each and every one of you Patreon supporters because you are the only reason InRange exists. It is your only funding source, so thank you. If you're not a Patreon supporter, please consider it. It does have some perks. I do put up some videos there that I can't put up on YouTube, like making Civil War ammunition shows up from time to time, and there's going to be more of that coming. as well as there's some conversations that happen there as well, and access to our Discord, which is a community, a vibrant community of in-range supporters that have their own world there now, which is really cool. If you can't, I do understand. Just subscribe to one of our channels. You can find us. We're on multiple distribution points. You can find it all at InRange.tv. Thanks, and share with your friends.